Coming to you live from a suit and tie. This is the Electoral College. I'm Austin.
And I'm Carson.
And on today's episode...
Oh, shut up, man. Just you keep yapping.
Huh? I'm trying to discuss early voting turnout in America.
That's fake news.
In Virginia.
Wrong.
It's
wrong.
But, dude, I'm cool.
Alright, so our topics today.
We're going to bring up early voting turnout in Virginia, how it's hitting record numbers, and the debate that happened on Tuesday.
And then we'll also be talking a little bit about possible violence after this election, and we'll be talking about...
COVID-19.
Yes.
Specifically, the Republicans, a bunch of them are getting it. And first, before we even start with our topics, I want to ask you a question. A couple weeks ago, we mentioned, even before the podcast, we both kind of agreed that for better or for worse, odds are come November, unless something drastic happens, Trump would probably win re-election. Do you think we're in this timeline now where enough has happened to dissuade that?
No.
Not yet?
I still think Trump is leading. As a matter of fact, I think what this COVID thing is actually going to help him. Because now he's going to get sympathy votes. If he recovers, right, he's going to be able to boost up his support and say COVID's been a hoax, right? You know, I recovered, so everybody else can recover too, right? You know, it keeps him out of the debates, you know. Depending on what news source you're reading, those debates did not go so well, right?
Depending on what news source says they went well.
For Trump, a couple.
I don't think it went well for either of them. It was a pretty nightmare of a watch.
Yeah, so I think the COVID's going to help him in the long term here.
All right, so going off that, let's actually talk about COVID first.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, a bunch of Republican heads have gotten COVID. I have a list in front of me. Hope Hicks, who's on the senior council and former White House communications.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Donnie, his wife Melina, Ronald McDaniel, who's the RNC chair, Mike Lee, who's just a senator, John Jenkins, who's the president of the University of Notre Dame, Kellyanne Conway was yesterday, I believe, Tom Tillis, Bill Steppen, Ron Johnson, and earlier today, Chris Christie.
Mm-hmm.
They all got it. What's your take on that?
I mean, you get what you ask for. I mean, you know, all these people have been saying COVID-19's a hoax this whole time. They've been saying, you know, masks don't work. You know, they've been very adamant about that. You know, Trump has continuously held rallies against CDC guidelines, and we know that's true because he got sued and fined for it in Nevada. You know, so there's no, you know, argument against that. You know, he lost. He had to pay a fine. You know, he is doing illegal activities by state mandates with social distancing. He just doesn't seem to care. You get what you preach. All right. You know, they were asking for it, more or less.
You get what you preach. Good to say
Get
what you sow, I guess.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I feel like you can only play with fire for so long before you end up getting burned, if you like idioms. I feel like it's surprising that it took this long, to be honest with you.
Me too. I'm thoroughly surprised it took this long, especially because, like, we heard a couple weeks ago, there was a good meme going around with Herman Cain, right? You know, because he sadly passed away from COVID-19, yet people were
He's still tweeting.
Still tweeting through using his account. He got COVID-19 at a Trump rally. You know, Trump was this close to getting it. You can't really see my fingers, but they're very close together, right? You know, so it could have happened, but it didn't. He's been lucky. He's been very, very lucky, and now all of a sudden his luck has run out.
And the dam's broke.
Dam's broke.
I think something else that's important to mention, and I want to actually touch on, especially regarding COVID, is Joe Biden tested negative yesterday or 2 days ago, and people started celebrating that. I don't think that's a good idea to celebrate yet, because COVID takes, 2 to 10 days to be positive?
Something like that.
So he should probably be continuing his testing on himself. Make sure.
And he will be.
Right, of course.
He's vice
We get updates every day. And it almost feels like an unprecedented situation that one of our candidates is sick, potentially for month. It's a potential possibility that both of them get sick.
And I think the scariest part about this is we don't know how bad Trump's condition is going to be. because when Trump first came into the White House, he was spewing lies left and right, and one of those lies was that he was in perfect health condition, and he had a doctor write a note saying that he was in perfect health condition, and then the White House doctor said, "No, he's not. This is a lie." So Trump has in the past used medical professionals to lie on his behalf, and so the question is going to be is this a lie? The other question is, I told you earlier that this COVID-19 could be used to his benefit. Could this be also just a thing for him to avoid the debates? Could this be a thing for him to get sympathy votes? Could he purposely just have mild symptoms and then act them up in order to get those sympathy votes? We won't know because the doctors won't tell
I
us.
feel like he's got COVID. I don't think he would. Yeah,
He for
he
sure
might be
has
playing it up,
COVID.
obviously,
But it's
Right.
Is he playing it up or is he actually feeling as bad as it says he is? That's the question.
The fake doctor thing reminded me of politics, not from here, but from hundreds of years ago. King Henry the Third, the big famous picture of him, he was on this tear to make sure everyone thinks he's like the peak of human health, even though like he's a fat, ill-bred boy, and his leg was destroyed in a jousting accident, and he's like, "I'm this great big man." But in reality, he was a big man who ate 5,000 calories a meal.
Yeah, very similar to that. We've talked about this a couple times. Very similar to an authoritarian in some respects. Not being truthful about your health. But
Well, I feel like everyone's gonna make themselves look better than they are. That's
Of
really
course.
authoritarian.
Of course, but it's a very scary thing.
I think it's scary to lie about like what could be
Mm-hmm.
regarding government policies, but being like, I'm healthy. I'm a picture of health. That's not too bad. Seeing as like you got an image to represent.
Mm-hmm.
Trump, for better or for worse, is an icon at
Yeah.
this point. He's kind of got to maintain that appearance of being 75 and not dead yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that'll help his case a lot, if he does get through it, because he'll say, "Oh, I've survived COVID. I have the antibodies. You're President Joe Biden. He's old. He's weak. He's frail.
Could he survive it?
Exactly. I don't think he could survive it.
Frankly, I don't think Joe Biden could survive having the COVID like I did.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Exactly.
a tremendous illness. One of the worst illnesses. And I don't think Sleepy Joe could
Exactly.
handle such a virus.
That's exactly what's gonna happen. Yeah, so it's an interesting kind of thing. It's a developing story, of course, because Joe could still have it, some other people can still have
And you
it.
figure I mentioned Chris Christie. He was diagnosed a few hours ago this morning. There could be someone being diagnosed like now.
We talked last week about the Supreme Court justice nominee. That's all Trump's been doing over the last week. There's one senator who reported that he did not come in contact with Trump, but he came in contact with his Supreme Court nominee, Amy, and he now has COVID. And so Amy could have been a carrier, and she might not be having symptoms, right? But she's spent a lot of time with Trump over the last couple days, and other members of his office trying to get ready for the Supreme Court. She could get it. That's still up in the air too.
Of course, now you got to figure as well, like how much does that hurt the proceedings going forward? If she has COVID, they obviously can't go before hearings.
Mm-hmm. We'll find a way, I'm sure, to push it through regardless, but it's still going to be an interesting how they figure out how to
They've
do
got until
that.
January. They can crack something.
Uh-huh.
Toss. Put them in.
One of the major concerns with this COVID thing is they believe they figured out which aide gave it to the president and some of the other things because she tested positive before everybody else did. The question, though, is when did she get it? Because that's still up in the air. And if she had it, did she give it to the president during said debate? In which case, then
Joe Biden
could have it. All
Chris
that kind
Wallace.
of stuff. Chris Wallace could have it.
Oh no.
But yeah. But speaking of the debates,
Speaking of Chris Wallace,
yeah, what a guy.
let's talk about these debates. This debate, the great debate, everyone's favorite debate.
Eh,
I don't know.
So,
If anything, the best word you can use to describe the debate is entertaining. It was something.
which is what the debate usually is. I've read a couple studies that say that the debate usually doesn't impact voter turnouts. It usually doesn't impact people's opinions. They usually go into these debates knowing which candidate they want already.
Right.
So it's just a show, and it lived up to that.
It's a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you who you think won, but I don't really think I need to.
You already know the answer. Joe Biden won.
Yeah, I figured if I asked that, you would say that. I personally don't think either of them won. It was a bad look both ways in my mind. I mean,
Well, I think it helps who it was meant to. If you were an on the fence Joe Biden supporter, I think Joe Biden demonstrated enough to earn your vote because Trump was so aggressive and awful that if you were thinking of voting for Joe Biden, you probably confirmed yourself to vote for Joe Biden. At the same time, in 2016, Donald Trump lost all three presidential debates, according to almost every news media outlet, and even Fox News said he lost. All right, yet he ended up winning the presidency. For his base, he probably said everything that he needed to say to his supporters to make them happy.
to reaffirm it.
Yep.
Because he figured that's what you got to go into these debates doing, not really trying to get other voters. We're too split up partisan-wise nowadays to be like, I'm going to try to get all these Biden supporters to vote for me, Donald Trump. But, like, we can't do that anymore, you know?
But let's talk about some highlights.
Highlights of the debate. Were there any? I guess what's a low, like, reel?
I mean, there's a couple highlights, some interesting kind of altercations. We started off talking about one as a joke here to begin our podcast, where Joe Biden told Donald Trump, "Oh, shut up, man. Keep yapping. I don't think he can be quiet." All of those kinds of things. Joe Biden got a couple of one of those one-liners in there.
That's all the debate was one-liners. Not all of them landed, though, huh?
Not all of them landed, no. Another, personally for me, probably a good highlight that I saw was when Joe Biden talked about his kids, because Trump was mocking his children. And I think it was phenomenal how Joe Biden, talked about that. How his one son who served in the military isn't a loser. He was a military veteran. He did what he did for this country. His other son beats drug addiction. That's not an easy thing to do. I like that. I thought that was interesting.
I did as well. So the first thing they brought up,
It's coronavirus,
which
yeah.
we brought up, and it's almost funny in hindsight now, how they talked about the coronavirus, and now all of a sudden the dam's broken like a few days later.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Trump has repeatedly claimed that his administration's response to the pandemic was exceptional.
the Trump's campaign strategy is just so bad because he's trying to be like, this is Joe Biden's fault, and if Joe Biden was president, it would only be worse. Joe Biden's been out of the public sphere for the past 4 years. All right, Joe Biden during the Trump administration had H1N1. They dealt with that. They had an Ebola outbreak. They dealt with that. They created the infectious disease department. All right, they created a task force to deal with that kind of stuff. And Trump's over here claiming Joe Biden, more people would have died if Joe Biden was president. I think that's just a factless claim. I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah. It's definitely a factless claim because Joe Biden's not president.
Exactly.
I feel like you can obviously blame Trump. I think I mentioned this last week or the week before. How much of it can you blame on Trump versus how much can you blame on people just being stupid? Because I've seen people, despite mask mandate, not wear a mask. We're on college campus and we still see people in buildings without masks and such.
Well, I mean, stupid breeds stupid. I've lived by that saying for a long time. So when Trump says you don't have to wear a mask, or when the president doesn't wear a mask, if you're a citizen and you're like, well, the president's not wearing a mask, why should I?
Yeah, and he's
You know.
and even now, like he started to get more into the mask thing. I've seen, I don't even remember. I saw a Facebook post about this woman who's like, even if Trump wears a mask, I will not. Something something God, something something, probably Constitution, something
Yeah,
something.
God, mask give you coronavirus. I've seen that claim. I've seen the claim that masks don't work. You know, the conspiracy theories on it are almost like contradictory. Like they want one of them will say the mask doesn't work, and then the other one will say, well, when you wear the mask, you keep breathing in CO2 and you can get CO2 poisoning. I've seen that as a conspiracy theory. So either the mask works or it gives you CO2 poisoning. Those don't work together, you know?
Because they're conspiracy theories and they're never right.
They're on the exact opposite end of both the spectrum.
Crazy, yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting kind of first topic. You know, Biden tried to be like the main point I remember is Biden was like, how many of you are sitting at breakfast today or lunch today, and how many of you have an empty seat at your table? You know, I think that was impactful. I think that was a good line.
And we'll go down that a bit. I felt like Biden looking at the camera was nice, but I felt like he kind of overdid it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he kept like, it wasn't like he was just looking at the camera all the time, or like did it every now and again for impact. He just kept kind of like looking at the camera, and I can get what he's doing, but like, I feel like when you do it over and over, it kind of gets stale.
We got to remember past debates too. You know, when Trump is yelling at the person in the room and then the other person starts talking to the camera, it seems almost off. But if you look at presidential debates going back, you know, decades,
Kennedy.
they both talked into the camera.
Yeah.
Nixon and Kennedy both talked to the American people. They didn't debate each other. They answered the question and went on to the next question. You know?
It was very civil. There still would be jabs sometimes, but they wouldn't be as like obnoxious and out there as it is today. I believe it was Reagan who was made fun of his opponent, where he's like, I will not use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him.
Yeah, Reagan was a good joke guy, or well, to him it was jokes, but to others it was attacks. You know, but yeah.
You figure back then that's an attack. Imagine if they saw it as like now.
Yeah. All right, but what was the next topic we went to?
Next topic, the economy. Actually, before we move on, one more thing about the COVID that I wanted to mention. Biden kept pounding at home that Trump underplayed the virus. Not in the sense that he is not wearing a mask and such, but in the sense that the White House knew prior to it getting out of control that it was a potential danger. What are your opinions on the effects of that?
I mean, it's pretty accurate. Trump didn't do anything to deal with the virus right away. The only thing he did to prevent the virus was closed immigration. But he's always wanted to close immigration, right? So did he actually care about COVID, or did he care about closing down immigration? You know, so I think he 100% was like, yeah, I'm going to shut down immigration. You know, I don't care. You know.
Right. One of the things is I think it's all right to have downplayed it to avoid what he said was Trump was worried about the spread of panic, which is that really what it is? Who knows? But if that's true, which who knows if that's really true? It's coming out of Trump. That's like a fair excuse, I think, is to try to deal with this quietly, because if they panic, it's always going to spread it more.
But people panicked anyway.
Right.
You know, they went and got the toilet paper. We ran out of toilet paper and cleaners and everything. You know, so like, what would have been better? You know, being like, hey, toilet paper companies, you need to start ramping up production, you know, or, you know, just pretending nothing's happening. Oh, it'll disappear. It'll disappear. You know, he said that a couple times. It'll just disappear.
Toilet paper, man. Worked at Walmart. That was so much fun, man.
Oh,
we had to limit one per person.
I can imagine.
It was stacked. Next up,
the economy.
The economy. Trump's probably biggest claim to re-election, if you could argue that, is the economy being pretty good, especially pre-COVID, doing pretty well. The stock market's soaring, which doesn't really matter too much right now, huh?
Well, the stock market doesn't measure the well-being of the people, especially when we consider how much money the Fed is spending. When we consider that, the stock market's going to do great because the Fed is backing all these bets. But at the end of the day, people are still unemployed. People are suffering. So you can claim that the stock market's doing great all you want, but that doesn't mean the normal Americans are. And I don't think Trump understands that because he has always read the stock market to determine how economics is doing as a business person.
To measure corporate success.
Yep. And to him, he keeps seeing the stock market up, and he's like, things are going great, we're going to rebound, but that might not happen.
Yeah, I feel like the stock market is a decent gauge for how we're doing economically, because you figure, even if it is much more watered down for the everyday man, when a company's doing better, its employees are going to be doing a little better. Especially when it comes to high stocks.
See, that's not always true because...
That's not always true.
No, because, I can't remember the company off the top of my head. GM. GM, when they closed the Lordstown plant and fired all those workers, laid off all those workers, their stock went up. All right, so you can't claim that their employees are doing better because their employees are doing worse. They don't have any jobs anymore. But because GM was showing that they're balancing their sheets... it was like, GM's a safe investment. They're saving money. They're making billions of dollars, by selling off this business or by selling off this factory. So their stock went up and their people's livelihoods went down.
Yeah, I suppose. You figure that that's sort of almost not like an exception, but a different breed of this success at the cost of these people that are getting that success. What I'm trying to mean is that when a company is doing well, its people are doing well. Not as a result of its people being poor. Like, for instance, if I fire a bunch of workers, let's say if I'm chairman of Electoral College Inc., we've made it, we're big, and I lay off a couple workers for no reason, of course the company's going to be doing better. But when my company's growing not at the expense of these workers, the workers' lives will be doing better because of that. Because if I'm making my company better without downsizing, without terminating contracts, I see you shaking your head there.
See, I still can't buy it because, you say that's the exception, but then look at Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. His company is doing better than it ever has, during this COVID pandemic, and his workers still aren't allowed to unionize. His workers still have step counters in the factories. If you aren't taking enough steps during a guaranteed amount of time, they will penalize your pay. So he is exploiting workers to make his stocks go up, and he is, GM fired workers to make their stocks go up. When you see recessions, almost every recession, people lose their wages. Their wages go down. In order to, even YSU, where we're doing our podcast, we were threatening to fire people. All right. And we did. But then we came to an agreement in the administration that some administrators would lose money. For example, you and me are both political science majors. Our previous political science advisor took a $17,000 paycheck cut in order to keep more jobs at this university. So even us, as a state-run university, people are still doing worse off now than they were before. And I think it's scary because it's not going to recover fast, and wages are going to be lower, and people are going to be desperate taking jobs. And it's bad when we had the job report come out just a couple days ago. When the job report came out, the Republicans said we are now working on a relief package. The Republicans this whole time were like, oh, relief, we don't need it, until they saw the jobs report, and they were like, oh my God, it's that bad. Now they're starting to work with Nancy Pelosi again on a new bill. It's not going to go great. These people are hurting across the country, and the stock market is being inflated because Trump wants it to be. He passed legislation to do that. So the stock market's going to keep making money while people keep losing it.
Right, especially right now, you figure with the unemployment is the big problem, of course. I feel like we're gonna rebound. It's gonna get there, but it's gonna take
for sure.
a while.
Yeah, we'll rebound for sure.
I personally believe it's not gonna take too long. I feel like we're gonna be back fairly well mid next year, late next year. That's when like a lot of the taxes are gonna be coming back. You figure, like not coming back, but stabilizing, such as the income tax, the payroll tax, tourism, and that tourism and transportation is obviously still going to be struggling then. But I feel like we're going to get back to it before too long.
I think you're right. I don't think it's going to be as long as it was during the Great Recession. But I'm still a bit scared. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not going to be as bad as it was then. Mostly because this is not necessarily a problem of policy per se. This is more of like there's a pandemic going on. And once I feel like the pandemic's gone, we can just bring it back fairly easy. It's not a result of, or at least not entirely a result of political gridlocking or anything like that, where it's these problems that we're not going to be able to solve for 4-6 years. It's just more of a, hey, this is here, it's blocking it. Once it's gone, we can get back to business and we can figure it out. So that's the economy.
Yep, next topic.
The Supreme Court.
That one was an interesting debate topic. Because Biden claimed Trump was being hypocritical. Trump said, I have 4 years as president, I can do what I want. The big thing for me as a Democrat, Biden said Amy is a good person.
Yeah.
And that was a bit,
Of course.
What did you think? Yeah.
Of Amy or of the topic?
The topic. What was your hot take?
I kind of thought it was a little strange that the Supreme Court, which was this huge topic, was almost kind of backgrounded. It was kind of like put in the background a bit compared to like COVID and then Law and Order, which we'll get to. But I feel like it's important to note, like you said, Biden believes this is a good person. I mean, we mentioned COVID earlier and how it's going to delay the proceedings. I don't feel like the debate has changed any minds on the Supreme Court. One of the big takeaways I had from it was a response Trump had when Biden said that people should be allowed to choose this. Trump mentioned that they kind of did back in 2016. And I was like, that's fair-ish, I guess. You obviously mentioned hypocritical, and we can get in on that because Mitch McConnell was obviously, we should not be electing in the election year and such like that.
Yeah, like I agree with Trump. I think you should have 4 years to do your appointments and that kind of stuff. But as a Democrat right now, I can't give it to him because Obama didn't get his 4 years. He was elected in 2012. He was supposed to appoint a Supreme Court justice in 2016. The Republicans didn't let him. So why should I let Trump appoint a Supreme Court justice that's going to affect people's lives for 20, 30, 40 years maybe, when they didn't give Obama the same light of day?
But Obama's not end up getting it?
No. That's where Kavanaugh came in.
Right,
Obama was going to appoint Gorsuch. Mitch McConnell didn't let it happen. And then when Trump got elected, they pushed through Kavanaugh.
The nuclear option.
Yep.
But nuclear. And we can talk about the courts all we want. We talked about it last week, I believe.
Yeah.
Talk about nuclear options, talk about packing the bench, etc.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like we need to go into too deep of detail about
we can just go to the next topic, yeah.
Race and violence in American cities. I'm going to let you start this one, because you look like you have something you want to say.
I mean, I think Trump is just trying to discharacterize Biden. He claims Biden's a socialist. He claims, Biden has medical issues, even though he's never seen Biden's medical cards. He's a loser, blah, 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 blah. He's had 47 years with no accomplishments. Biden's accomplished things in 47 years, right? It's not like he just sits there and collects a paycheck. He's passed bills. He's done things. But Trump was like, you support defunding the police. And Biden was like, no, I don't.
Which is something that he said in the past, but never on a big stage like this one, to the level where it's like, this is going to everyone. I feel like that almost hurts the far, like, And I'm not saying radical left is in like how people be like the radical left these days. I mean the true radical left, like the far, far gone left, like maybe like 1% of left voters, right? You figure how much does that dissuade them? They're obviously never ever gonna vote for Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much does that dissuade them off Biden, make them feel shaky, almost a third party, almost a no vote because Biden is not defunding the police, which is like the big thing that some of these radical lefts are pushing for. Is the idea that we need these police defunded. And obviously it was never gonna happen. Kamala Harris is a cop and then became a prosecutor. Like these two are not gonna defund the police.
No.
So it almost feels like this pipe dream that people are now finally getting popped. Like, oh, Biden's not defunding the police.
Yeah, Biden has not had the best race relations. You know, I wish he could do better on that, but he has had some issues along that, and I'll admit that. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's better than Trump still. Because Trump, you know, during this section,
Here we go.
Told the boys, the Proud Boys, to stand by.
And stand back and stand by.
Stand back and stand by, and he refused to renounce white supremacy. You know, that's scary.
And he would go on Twitter to say that he didn't know what the Proud Boys were, which, that's a pretty shaky excuse, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Very shaky.
Right.
Especially says, like, if it was a valid excuse, he could have been like, I didn't know what the Proud Boys were,
but now
I renounce
right.
them. But he didn't. He just said, I didn't know what they were. End of statement. You know, he didn't take that opportunity to correct his error.
Which feels so strange, because it feels like such a gimme, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we know now, of course, the president's opinions on BLM and such, and Antifa. So we know that he already denounces these groups. So how is he not able to just denounce the white supremacist group? You know what I mean? Because obviously
Because he is
be like,
one.
oh, yeah,
Got him.
maybe. But like, he's like, you people who are like, I hate fascists, but I also hate communists. You know what I mean? Like, we know the latter part. So why it doesn't really feel like we need to get it. Like, if Trump said that he denounced them, he's not going to lose that vote. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound like a cold take, but like, if you're a white supremacist, I'm not looking at you to imply that you are a white supremacist, of course. But if you're a white supremacist and you have a choice between a candidate who is white and a candidate who's not white, hypothetically speaking,
you know, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris,
right.
You know, with Joe.
We can use Obama as an example, actually, and we'll say Romney in this hypothetical. If you're a white supremacist and both groups denounce you, you're obviously still going to vote for Romney. You're not going to vote for Obama, right? Which I feel like Trump kind of dropped the ball on.
Yeah. And there's a reason why I think he dropped the ball on that, and we'll get into that a little later.
A little later?
Yeah,
oh, right.
Yep, that's one of my news articles I want to bring up.
And then the last debate topic, unless I missed one, is the integrity of the election with mail-in. And that can tie into mine as well.
That one was so bad. You know, Joe Biden was just like, you should vote. You know, the American people are going to determine this. And Trump was just like, I'm not going to concede. You know?
It's going to be a fraudulent election, a fraud of which you've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
And he called for election watchers, which I think I mentioned to you afterwards. I said that I'd be fine with a neutral party. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like a neutral registered party of election watchers to make sure that no fraudulent activity happens. But Trump wasn't referring to neutral registered election watchers. He was referring to supporters.
Yes.
To watch over the election and watch over these ballots.
And I worked for the Board of Elections, and I still do. In Ohio, every state has different election laws, but the majority of states, including Ohio, where we're filming this, we have laws that you have to be a registered poll watcher. You can't just show up to any poll, stand there, and watch. You have to go through a training. You have to go through the proper procedures and the channels. All right. So what scares me is like, I don't think people know that. Right, so I think they're going to show up to the polls and they're going to watch, and then we're going to have to call the sheriffs. I was teaching election classes all this last week for poll workers, And I got asked that question almost every day in every class. What happens if somebody is not a registered poll watcher? We have to call the sheriff and we have to take them away.
Right.
And if you're somebody who's going to watch the polls who doesn't understand that, what you're going to post on Twitter, what you're going to post on Facebook is, I tried to watch the polls and the Democrats and the sheriffs wouldn't let me.
My amendment rights were taken away from me.
My amendment's rights were taken away, exactly.
I don't know what amendment you would.
And that's what's really scary.
Right. You figure that's almost always what these radical people who do that, and the radical right, which was like 1% of the right, I mentioned earlier, the radical left, you figure they're going to use whatever they can to get whatever they want. And they could cite whatever amendment, even if it's not right. Like when I worked at Walmart, and I know it's not as politically pertinent as working at the Board of Elections, teaching election classes, we have people who'd cite their Fourth Amendment rights to not wear a mask. And I'm just like, huh? I don't get it. But you figure, to them, they're being censored.
Mm-hmm.
They need a good excuse. What better excuse than the Constitution at that point, you know?
Yep, it's gonna be interesting. But
off the topic of voting,
let's
talk about voting.
Talk
about early voting. This year we've had record turnouts for early voting, which is probably to be expected, but I don't think we expect it to the degree that we're seeing it now. For instance, from Washington Post in Virginia, early voting turnout has already hit record numbers, and we are 3 days out from the debate.
Mm-hmm.
It's already hit these record numbers.
30 days from election.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, and according to them, they cited over 100,000 voters have already cast ballots, and almost 900,000 more have requested absentee ballots. I personally feel like voting this early is a little iffy. I feel like, even though you kind of mentioned earlier that debates don't really change much, I feel like it still does have an inch on people. And even if it changes like one person. So I feel like voting this soon is kind of But yeah, seeing record turnout numbers is pretty great. And one thing I'd like to mention is I've seen a lot of people say that this spells doom for Donald Trump because, typically speaking, early voters are mostly Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, we saw this in the 2016 election where Hillary took a big lead early and then it got whittled away as the day went on. I feel like this is not the biggest deal. Obviously, it still matters. This is still important. But I feel like people typically think that this is a million voters have just fallen out of the sky. Like, oh my goodness, there's a million more votes. These people are, if they're voting early, are enthusiastic voters. They're kind of come out to vote anyways. It's not like they're new voters. You know what I mean?
And going off of that point, my parents are Trump supporters, sadly. They received a mail-in absentee ballot request form, that said, vote for Trump by mail. Here's how you can apply for an absentee ballot, and you can mail it back to the Board of Elections. He sent those to everybody's house. The Secretary of State for Ohio sent absentee ballot requests to every single registered voter in the state of Ohio. People are going to claim that Democrats are getting this, but you also have to remember that the Republicans are also the older set of voters. They have an average older age in the electorate. They might not feel comfortable going to vote in person because of the COVID virus. And if Trump and the Secretary of State sends them absentee ballot applications, they might take advantage of that. So it could be very well that they are in the lead. North Carolina, for example, Trump said you should vote absentee and then in person just to make sure your vote counts, which, you can do.
Right.
Only one of those votes will count. You'll be labeled as a provisional voter.
We mentioned that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So if you're in North Carolina and you're a Trump supporter, you might do both, like he asked you to, So there will be a lot of absentee applications there that are going to be Republican.
Right. According to John March, who's the spokesman for the Republican Party in Virginia, he thinks Republicans are more inclined to wait to vote on Election Day, on November 3rd. I kind of feel the same way. I feel like a lot of the Republicans are going to be preferring in person, right? Especially this I don't want to say radical right, 'cause it's not really radical right, but these anti-mask, these anti-COVID people are going to be like, I'll go in person. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I think we mentioned 2 weeks ago, they're going to get turned around because they don't have masks. And I feel like, what does that impact our election, where these people might be turned back, and not be allowed to vote without the mask?
So
Granted,
in Ohio, what we're doing is we have curbside voting, where if you're disabled or handicapped, you can vote from your car at your polling location. So that's how we're going to try to handle a lot of the mask people who don't want to wear a mask. You can just vote from your car. But at the same token, if you're angry enough and you're going to the polling location not wearing a mask to make a point, if that's your goal, then that's not good enough for you.
you take the Facebook.
Yep, you'll take it straight to Facebook, Twitter, whatever.
Oh, it's not. It's not gonna be Twitter. It's gonna be Facebook. We talked about partisan divide. I think that's that line too between Twitter and Facebook. Don't think either of them are good.
No.
Try to avoid both of them as much as I can.
But yeah, I think it's good that people are requesting absentee ballots. Vote early.
Yeah.
And, Ohio's deadline to register to vote is coming up here on the 5th. Some other states are also on the 5th. Make sure you're registered. You can request an absentee ballot anytime.
Yeah, I'm actually not from Ohio, so.
Well, sorry. Sorry for your loss.
Oh no, the great state of Ohio. I'm from just across the border in a different state.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, yeah, that's the one. Penn's Woods. So I'll update my absentee. But I'll probably get lost in the mail at YSU.
Yeah.
Because as someone who's worked with the mail at YSU, people don't care.
Yeah, our mail's not great here.
I worked at one of the desks as secretary for a little while. And my friend asked me one of the days, hey, I'm expecting this mail and like it should have been here like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Looked through the mail bin, guess what? Found it. That's 3 weeks worth of mail just sitting there, never taken back. It's like, wow, great. And how much is this with how much we are doing mail-in ballots? How much are the campuses like this who just don't give a care in the world to the mail-in? I might receive my ballot November 18th, and then it's too late.
And to keep that in mind for everybody else, it's not just campus mail that is a bit slow. Normal mail is going to be a little bit slow. With the influx, they say they're going to be handling it, but you should leave, 5 days for processing. For Ohio, you have to request your absentee ballot, as in you do most states. So it takes 5 days to get there. Then it gets 5 days for them to send you your ballots. And then it takes 5 days for you to send your ballot back in. So if you haven't requested an absentee ballot yet, we're looking at a 15-day probably procedure.
Yeah.
And election day is November 3rd. So if you're going to be doing that 15 days beforehand,
we're halfway there.
You need to get it done by the 20th.
And it's already the 3rd.
Yep. So you have 17 days probably and realistic to request an absentee ballot if you haven't already.
And even that, it's potential that couldn't be enough. So I can't stress enough to do this as early as you can if you're planning on voting, because it's possible that this influx is worse than we assumed, and they could be backed up 7, 10 days even.
Mm-hmm.
And you figure, especially for those tuning in on campus, like I said, 3 weeks of mail that I had to take out, and that's 21 days. I can do that math. I'm great.
If you're worried about the mail-in delays, most boards of elections will have mailboxes there. So you can drive to your local board of elections and drop it directly in their mailbox.
Right, I mean though, like, mail coming into campus.
Yes.
That, like...
I'm aware.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess I'll give you your due.
Yes.
You want to talk about
violence in America.
Tootie shooties in Iowa.
Yep, so as Trump said, he asked the Proud Boys to stand by. But some of these militant-ish groups, not the Proud Boys specifically, have already been active. If we look into an Economist article that came out this last week, it talks about how Democrats are doing in rural communities. The title of the article is "Democrats are doing less badly among rural voters. However, in a lot of these rural communities, Trump supporters seem to be a little bit more aggressive. There's a woman named Jane Podgornick. She's running for the Iowa House. A group of a militia, more or less, got together in her district and drove around the district with their guns and started shooting her signs out. On top of that, Trump said the Proud Boys should stand by. Another article that me and Austin were looking at earlier comes from Politico. They're doing studies on increased violence on elections. And as of now, 44% of Republicans and 41% of Democrats said that it could be justified, depending on the situation, to use violence if the other candidate wins.
And I think the number that I read, and I think I mentioned, was 1 in 5 Americans who have these political beliefs are acceptable with violence if the outcome is disfavorable to their party, which I think is crazy. 1 in 5 is so many people to just be like, all right with this violence, you know?
And the Democrats are also getting into it. I won't push that under the rug, but I will say that at least our candidate is not encouraging it. So if worse comes to worse, will the Democrats be upset? Will they protest? Will they burn down and loot cities? Most likely. But what scares me the most is our presidential candidate will at least tell people don't do that. This is not how we do things in America. While Trump, on the other hand, if Trump loses, his people are already shooting out yard signs in Iowa. He's told the Proud Boys to stand by. He is already encouraging violent behavior even before the election takes place. I can only imagine what it would be like if he loses and these people are already ready, guns a-blazing.
It's going to be a scary November, that's for sure, either way, which feels kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, huh? Because either way, you're still going to have these people taking whatever the hell they want into their own hands, whatever they believe. If Trump wins, if Biden wins, either way, there's still going to be protests and riots and weapons. It's scary stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we have to worry more about is, if Trump loses. I think that is going to be the worst scenario out of the possibilities.
I think
because Democrats we've already seen how Democrats protest.
We've seen it over the past few months.
We've seen it over the past few months. You'll probably just see the same protest continue in size and quantity.
I figure it'll be heightened a bit.
There will of course be death, and violence and shooters and that kind of thing. But I think Trump's people are preparing to make militias. I think they are legitimately ready to kill people if worse comes to worse.
Yeah, I feel like the nightmare scenario would be not just Trump loses, but Trump then goes on to encourage this violence, obviously. Because I have a feeling that, potentially speaking, if Trump loses, he might cry about it, he might whine about it. But I think at the end of the day, he's not going to be like, go up and shoot people. I feel like Trump at least has that much, I feel like it's weird to give Trump credit for stuff. But I don't feel like he's going to go that far on it. But the nightmare scenario is these supporters are getting violent, and Trump is just kind of egging them on, cheering them on.
But what about the guy over in Wisconsin who shot those 3 people? They were Black Lives Matter protesters. It's an interesting situation, and we don't have the full story, but we do know that there's a 17-year-old boy who supports Donald Trump who went into a city that's not even his own with a weapon and was prepared to shoot people in an interview, and that's exactly what he did, is he shot 3 people. And Trump says that man is a hero, an American hero. You say Trump's not going to encourage these people, but I think he will.
I feel like if it comes down to it, and it's more than just these individual cases, yeah, that's bad. Obviously, that's bad. But I feel like if a dangerous large militia is threatening government, I feel like Trump could actually have the brain to say no to that. Because I feel like
But the
it's
election's
going to affect
rigged.
him.
The election's rigged, so of course he needs to just retake power, right? Because the election was rigged against him. You know, I'm still not convinced.
I don't think we're going to be able to convince each other on this one.
Oh, for sure we won't be able to, but I just want to talk about it because I think
Right.
that's something that people need to know and be prepared for. Is if violence does erupt, that is something that could happen.
And I feel like that is obviously, I agree with you, it is the nightmare scenario where Trump loses and he goes on to support these rioters. And I feel like if Biden loses, that's not going to happen. Like Biden's not going to, like you said, there will be the protest, but he's not going to egg it on.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's equally a nightmare scenario where he does egg it on, but it is much less likely than Trump supporting it. Because we've seen it. We've seen Biden disown these looters and rioters. We know that he's not planning to defund the police.
And we know he's planning on accepting the election results.
Right.
So even if he loses, he'll accept them.
Yeah, because then they're kind of fighting without an icon, like I mentioned earlier. Like, they can't get behind Biden because he's already he's accepted it. Like, even if the people have not, he did. Sort of like what happened back in 2016, where a lot of the people weren't accepting the vote. You figure, like, the Not My President movement, Clinton accepted it. So you really can't go too far without the support of your public office. You know what I mean?
Yep, but that was the news article I wanted to bring up. So yeah.
It's very interesting times we're living in.
Very.
Scary. And it's only going to get more exciting over the next month. Over the next month, wow. It feels crazy because we've been saying over the next few months for the last few months. And it's within 30 days now.
Yep.
We're going to have a podcast on Halloween. And it's probably going to be a scary time, huh?
Very.
Not just because it's Halloween, but because we're 4 days out from the election. So I'm going to ask you one more. You think Trump's going to win in November at this point?
I still think he's likely. More likely than Biden. But it keeps getting closer and closer.
Right. I am feeling it's going to be a little bit closer. I feel like he might be struggling in Ohio and Pennsylvania,
but
a little too much.
But Trump's already looking at third alternatives. What do you think Amy Barrett's for? He said he wants to appoint her before the election in case there is a tie and the Supreme Court has to break it. He's said that publicly. He's looking at other options besides listening to election results.
And that's what the Democrats are trying to have Amy do, is to say that she would not rule on cases on the election. Granted, who knows what that would be like after the election, but...
Especially if the judges then go to a 4-4 split.
Right.
Then she doesn't have much of a choice, does she?
If I have faith in anything, I have faith in the Supreme Court on that one. I don't think they're going to flip that.
They did for George Bush. That's all I'll say. They did it once, they'll do it again. They did it for George Bush. Al Gore should have been president.
W. I think of W the same way I think of Obama. Like, I don't like them politically, but like, they're like the type of people that would be all right with like sharing a beer with. You know what I mean?
Oh, he would be a hoot to have a beer with, I'm sure.
Of course, I wouldn't have a beer because I'm young. I'm a little boy.
I would have 20 beers.
But my podcast partner here is an alcoholic almost. Nothing wrong with alcoholics, of course.
I'm in college. You have to do it.
Yeah, he's 26 or something. I don't know. How old are you?
21.
21?
Although I've been 21 for the last 3 years.
Yeah, since the 80s, probably. Anyways, I think that's all for us, is it? Any last things you have to say? Let you do the closer today.
Everything's falling apart. Don't die. Flee to a foreign country.
Register to vote.
Register to vote, and then flee to a foreign country.
Well, I think that'll call it a wrap for today. I'm Austin.
I'm Carson.
And thank you for tuning in to the Untitled College.